Here's a COVID riddle for you. Is it worth it to visit a museum in person, or can you see everything that's worth seeing online? It's not a real riddle because right now there is no choice. We're living life through our screens. But maybe you've gone to a virtual concert this year and had a pretty good time. Or maybe had a game night, gone on a date, took a cooking class. So maybe you'd say yes, it's totally worth it to participate in what we would call quote unquote normal life online. I'm back in my final year at McGill University in Montreal, where my favorite college professor, a guy named Peter Juncken, poses this very question.
Is it worth it to visit a museum? Let's say the Louvre in person.
At the time, I just sit there, wondering, what are we talking about here? I mean, I'm from Paris. The Louvre is iconic. That's not a question for me. It's a fact. Every time someone visits us, we take them to the Louvre. But do I stick my hand up in the air to share that? No. Every student has an opinion. But most of us shuffle our belongings and stretch, eventually daring to look up to the front of the class where Peter stands, thrusting his arms out as if to say, well, this question won't answer itself, will it? And as you all know, there's always that one kid who inevitably can't keep his thoughts to himself. And he says something like, it depends on what you're trying to get out of the experience. A classic non-answer that Peter doesn't even acknowledge. And we're off. Art is meant to be evocative. It's impossible to feel the full extent of its impact unless you're standing in its presence. 1 point for the Louvre. But what about VR? Someone else says. What if a virtual tour is so incredible that it's impossible to distinguish reality from virtual reality? Peter jumps in to say, for practical reasons, let's stick to technology that exists today. And with that, someone finally says what I've been thinking all along. Of course it's worth going to the Louvre in person. I mean, Da Vinci and Michelangelo, if the Louvre isn't worth visiting, I don't know what museum is. A junior raises her hand hesitantly and points out, you know, it's expensive to fly to France.
Riding on that momentum, someone blurts out,
I mean, the Louvre is kind of overrated. Like, we've all seen the masterpieces before, and there are thousands of tourists. The whole experience is so commodified, it detracts from the art itself. And thankfully, someone interjects to defend the Louvre, leading to my classmates deciding it is, in fact, worth it. If I'd raised my hand early on, I could have saved us all the trouble. But I didn't share my opinion because I'd been focused on a different question altogether. Why are we indulging this exercise to begin with? Peter lets us squirm for a moment longer before smiling and saying, yes, of course you should go. The question actually has nothing to do with the Louvre or the paintings or any of it. He says it's all about immersing yourself in a different environment. It's the smell of the fresh bread wafting from a local bakery. It's the random conversation you strike up waiting in line, or stumbling across a painting you've never heard of. It's all about the little happy accidents that make up a new experience. Whether it's going to the Louvre or a beach or a hiking trail, Peter argues that doing something new is worth it because it shakes you out of your patterns. A novel experience is like a key that opens the door to a whole new perspective. Peter explains that this change in outlook is what inspires creative thinking. At last, I finally got why Peter posed this question about the Louvre. For an entrepreneur, it's just as important to pursue novelty as it is to have an elevator pitch and know your target audience. The gist is this. Break out of your routine and you'll find new creative energy. What I didn't realize back then is that only months after graduating, I'd meet two guys who had also been inspired to shake things up, because some other wise sage had pushed them to embark on daily adventures outside of their comfort zones. For Matt, it was Ben Nemtin, who formed a group called The Buried Life. Ben and his friends had a show on MTV about traveling cross-country, checking items off their bucket list. For Ammar, it was Jason Silva, an Emmy-nominated host of the National Geographic award-winning show Brain Games. Jason is known for his long-winded but incredibly inspiring tangents on serendipity. These three inspirations, Peter Juncken, The Buried Life, and Jason Silva, were all kind of saying the same thing, just in different ways. Essentially, they were telling us to just get out there, start living, put yourself in positions where life feels a bit unfamiliar. That, they argue, is where inspiration hits. But how do you do that in the middle of a freaking pandemic? From Headspace Studios, I'm Thomas Bragg.
I'm Ammar Kandil.
And I am Matt Dajer.
And that's what we'll be talking about just after the break. The pandemic has inevitably contributed to the feeling that we're all in a bit of a collective rut right now. Life isn't moving at the same speed, and it feels like it takes 10 times the effort to get just as far. But I'm guessing this isn't the first time you've felt this way. It's definitely not the first time I have.
Maybe a job stopped fulfilling you, or your routine felt stale.
Looking back, was there something that made you feel fully alive again? A hobby, a movie, or a book, maybe even a fun night out with friends?
Any type of inspiration that added some spice to your life again.
When we started Yes Theory, we made what some would argue was the hardest leap. We stopped talking about what was holding us back and started actually going after novel experiences that we thought could bring us closer to the lives we wanted to live. But we discovered along the way, it wasn't just about that first leap. When you're committed to true growth, the starting never stops. There are always a million new projects we want to tackle, places we want to travel to, qualities we want to improve in ourselves. We are lifelong students, always seeking the next lesson. But how can we really do that right now? Starting something new in any environment feels daunting. Starting something in the midst of a pandemic feels nearly impossible. Chasing novel experiences when borders are closed and we're being told to stay apart seems like a ridiculous goal. Right now can be exasperating. We're not diminishing that at all. But also, bad things happen all the time. It's super rare that all the stars align for us to start something new, so why not now? When we began taping interviews for this podcast, we were terrified. It's one thing to put yourself to the test on camera. It's an entirely different experience being vulnerable off the cuff with people you've respected for years. Even though we're the guys who've made a career getting out of our comfort zones, being total beginners again doesn't get easier.
Oh my God, it's so scary.
That's Ben Nemton, who started The Buried Life. Ben is a guy who knows how to dive headfirst into his passions, who has risen from the ashes time and time again.
We wanted to discuss the discomfort of starting. So we wanted to understand, like, how do you deal with the early stage fear, doubt, anxiety, and like outside pressure to actually begin? I mean, for us, we're starting a podcast. We've never really done this.
Yeah.
It's scary to
It's
start something new.
The hardest part is taking that first step to do something new.
Right.
Once you take the step and then the second step and the third step, you start to look back and you think, wow, why didn't I do that earlier?
We all have something we cling to that we use to convince ourselves to delay starting. Before Yes Theory, I was overwhelmed by the pressure to follow a traditional career path. Ben also struggled with others' expectations of him. Before traipsing around the world, checking off bucket lists, Ben was on the national rugby team in Canada. Pretty cool, right? Well, for Ben, not really.
In hindsight, the reason I was doing it was because I was worried about what other people thought about me. I was in my first year university. I was really excelling in a lot of different things that I thought were really important. Like, I had really good grades, so I got an academic scholarship. I was on the national rugby team. I was basically the field goal kicker and the quarterback, so there's a lot of pressure on me. And I would always put a lot of pressure on myself. And as we got closer and closer to the World Cup, I started worrying about my field goals. I think I always sort of had this thing where I really cared about what other people thought about me. So I was really trying to do well at everything. I thought, what if I miss an easy kick? And this pressure continued to grow. And ultimately, I started losing sleep and I got anxiety.
If you hadn't already experienced anxiety or insomnia before the pandemic, chances are you've gotten a taste of each by now. On top of whatever personal obstacles are holding us back from starting, the pandemic as an excuse really takes the cake. But it turns out there's actually something bigger in our very wiring that makes taking that first step so hard. We asked Ammar's wise sage, Jason Silva, about this. As a futurist, keynote speaker, and documentarian, Jason learned that ultimately our reticence comes down to our
contradictory wiring. We seek novelty and we seek comfort, refuge, predictability, and reliability. Picture a child, right? Child is very attached to his mother. What you want is a dynamic as a kid, I think, where the little child The mother is hugging him, comforting him, telling him you're fine. And then it's like, okay, go play. And then the little kid is like going towards like the recess or Gina's jumping the pool with his friends. But then he stops and he turns back to make sure that his mother is saying, no, you're fine. You're safe. Go. It's like that is what you want for like healthy psychological function, is you want to be able to tick the boxes of comfort and novelty. But I think what happens is people eventually kind of make a trade-off, and they're like, I can't actually have them both, so I'll choose comfort instead. I'll choose my golden prison. I'll get locked into this routine that's predictable and safe.
Today, comfort feels less like a golden prison and more like a golden ticket, so we don't want to downplay that. But on our end, even the coziest situations can eventually grow stale.
There's nothing worse than banality.
Jason again.
One of the pathways to synchronicity and serendipity is seeking discomfort, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, stepping into a place where you are more naked and you're not clothed in your armor. And then it's not a guarantee, but there's a higher percentage of possibility that some counterintuitive insight is going to come from shaking the snow globe a little bit,
Remember Ben's rut we were talking about earlier? Well, in university, Ben struggled with the pressure of balancing academia with his athletic career. As the stakes grew, he felt further and further overwhelmed by his responsibilities. Ben was jumping from one obligation to another, waking up, going to class, eating, studying, practicing, and going to sleep. And then he would start all over again. He had no flexibility to shake up the proverbial snow globe, and eventually his anxiety built up to an uncontrollable level.
And I got to the point where I couldn't go to school because I was just immobilized by this anxiety. And then I couldn't go to rugby practice. And I sunk into a depression that was so debilitating that I was unable to leave my parents' house for a very long time. And I would just go for a walk if I could for 15, 20 minutes. And sometimes I would just hide in the driveway and tell my parents that I went for a walk. And it was a very terrifying time because I didn't know how dark it could get.
This feeling that Ben is alluding to, well, he's not alone. In fact, our collective mental health may be in one of its darkest moments.
Jason explained his theory on the root of anxiety and depression.
Both share the same characteristic in that you're over-identified with the ego. That's not even serving you, but you're like terrified of letting go of it. And people can tell a depressed person, no, you don't understand. There's a way of seeing things that is beautiful. That won't get through because their lenses of perception are so powerful and they're so over-identified with their depressing worldview at this point that anything that threatens their over-identification with that worldview is simply filtered out.
Jason says one way you can crack through this worldview is with
what they call an experience of knowledge by acquaintance rather than knowledge by description. Because just telling them ain't going to work.
A worldview that is centered around ourselves is comfortable. It's what we know. So breaking out of that self-centered perspective and putting someone or something else at the center of our worldview, that's hard. It means letting go of our ego.
Letting go of your self-construct or your self-identity feels like dying. But in the right context, you become aware of your own lenses. It doesn't mean you have to let them go. But you see your own lenses of perception. You see your own stories from this different vantage point. It could be just dropping out of a plane. It could be like quitting your job and moving to India. An experience where you become directly acquainted with another way of seeing things that can dissolve those barriers. And it's a very real thing because we get set in our ways and set in our loops and set in our comforts and set in our prison. And eventually we can develop a Stockholm syndrome, which is the condition of falling in love with your captor. Only in this case, your captor is your self-construct. So you over-identify with yourself and you fall in love with the parts of yourself that are keeping you in a prison. But you don't realize that part of yourself is keeping you in a prison.
In Ben's case, he had literally confined himself at home. But there were a couple of key things he did to emerge from this dark phase of heightened anxiety. First and foremost was professional help.
I started talking about what I was going through to a therapist. I started learning about what I needed to be healthy, and over time, that sort of like toolkit has grown. creative expression is really important in my own mental health. So I didn't have something that I was latching on to express who I truly was. And I think that's what being creative is. It's just like you're bringing out this piece of you that is so true that it's almost therapeutic.
Before Ben sought help, there wasn't room for these creative pursuits. He always felt restricted to his commitments, but seeking out new ways of thinking felt more and more possible as Ben started to surround himself with different people that would inspire him.
In those moments, I needed to be around people that were going to lift me up and bring me more energy and joy.
One of those people was a guy that Ben knew from his neighborhood. His name was Johnny. Johnny was this free-spirit documentarian with long blonde hair and a curious soul. Ben and Johnny didn't only become good friends, they became creative collaborators. Exactly what Ben was craving. So, pretty quickly, the two started to throw around concepts for a documentary. But they couldn't really settle on an idea.
Johnny was at his first year university at McGill, and he was in English class. And the professor assigned him a 150-year-old poem called The Buried Life. And The Buried Life was written in 1852 by a poet named Matthew Arnold in England.
The poem is pretty long, so I'm not going to read all of it. But here's a few verses. But often in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the den of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life.
For the first time, Johnny found something that really articulated this feeling that we had all these things that we wanted to do, but we hadn't done them because they were buried. And we had these moments when we were inspired, but the day-to-day ultimately would bury those things. And so we thought, okay, well, I guess we're not the first people to feel like this. And our way of unburying our dream was to ask this question: what do you want to do before you die? And from that question, the bucket list started to form. And we thought, okay, I guess this is what the movie's going to be about. We're going to go out on a road trip. We're going to cross things off our list.
Last week, we bought our bus, and Ben got to see it for the very first time.
All right, here we go. Here, we're turning the corner right now. Ben's gonna see it. Oh my God! Are you kidding me?
Ben and Johnny pulled in two other friends to form The Buried Life, and together they drafted a bucket list. Okay, so road tripping across the country to check experiences off a bucket list, that's like the prime example of pursuing novelty. It's seeking out those once-in-a-lifetime moments. But Ben took it one step further.
And every time we cross something off our list, we're going to help a stranger that we meet do something on their bucket list.
The main thing that Trevon wants to do before he dies is get one of his songs on the radio. But the DJ said they're going to play the song today at 2:20. So we're going to meet Trevon at his grandma's house so that they can share that experience. Basically, he wants to show her that he's on a new path.
Grinding to realize their bucket lists, from learning to sail to being on Oprah, was totally worth it for Ben and his friends.
Please welcome the guys from The Buried Life, Duncan, Dave, Johnny, and Ben.
While it's probably not at the level of meeting Oprah, we experience novel experiences all the time. Go to a city you've never been to before, a new grocery store, hiking trail, even a Zoom party. And boom, new.
But what makes a truly novel experience that facilitates growth and shifts our perspectives?
Novel experiences has to do with a desire for heightened aliveness. Essentially, what we're looking for is heightened qualitative intensity, which is just more intensely felt feelings of presence. So it's almost cliche, but it's like, oh, you mean being in the moment? But being in the moment is hardly intuitive or easy for many of us. We're stuck in the monkey mind of either future planning, which is something that we've inherited as Homo sapiens to mitigate against future dangers. You can't be in the now. You're preoccupied and pre-distracted with what you think you ought to be thinking about or worrying about, or even worse, thinking about the past and being filled with regret. And so we're oscillating between this kind of longing for times past or anxiety about the future.
Whether or not he overtly realized it, when Ben started The Buried Life, he shook himself out of the monkey mind Jason is talking about.
One of the things that we love about travel, about novelty, about beauty, is that these experiences seem to block all signals forwards and backwards in the brain. So that capacity of comparing this with what came before to predict what's coming next, that gets knocked offline. So by blocking all those signals forwards and backwards, you're sort of hurled into the flow of the present. So essentially, you're like a child again. Children live in the reverie of the present. They live in the reverie of the moment. And it turns out the only way we can get there as adults is through intense experiences. Pushed past discomfort, experiences that violate our expectations, experiences that overwhelm us, experiences of beauty, rapture, travel, and so on and so forth. By blocking these signals forwards and backwards, you're in the flow of the present. And by definition, the present feels good when you can't predict what's about to happen.
With The Buried Life, Ben quickly learned that novel experiences cause a ripple effect, leading us to discover not just new ways of thinking, but new communities too.
People actually wanted to help us with our list. And then people wanted help with their dreams. And that was something that was not expected. We didn't really think that people were going to really care about what we were doing. And then we started to clue into this idea later that, oh yeah, when you do what you love, you inspire other people to do what they love.
We're going to take a quick break, but before we do, this podcast is produced by Headspace Studios. Headspace has thousands of hours of meditation content. The best tool you have is your mind, so take care of it. When you're running a YouTube channel or any small business, the most important thing is your team. You gotta have rock stars running the show. For us, we're always looking for top-notch editors and producers. Regardless of who you're looking for, LinkedIn Jobs has a great selection of candidates to choose from. Their backend screens for hard and soft skills, then matches the role you're looking for to fill with pre-qualified candidates so that you can hire fast and right the first time. LinkedIn is a community of over 690 million professionals worldwide with diverse experiences and skill sets. And LinkedIn Jobs helps you leverage that community by putting your posting in front of qualified members and only bringing the best back to you. When your business is ready to make that first hire, find the right person with LinkedIn Jobs. You can pay what you're comfortable with and get the first $50 off. Just visit linkedin.com/yestheory. Again, that's linkedin.com/yestheory to get $50 off your first job post. Terms and conditions apply. The Buried Life spent years on the road, helping others realize their dreams as they accomplished their own bucket lists along the way. Their infectious spirit drew interest from big companies, and eventually MTV ordered a show from the guys. That's the show that inspired Matt. After watching The Buried Life, he dreamed of doing something really similar. When we met, he showed it to me and was like, yo, this is what we should try to do together. And now we've come full circle with Ben, except there's more to his story. As their television show gained traction, the guys proved themselves as creators. And so the logical next step was creating their own production company where they could develop a number of documentaries.
After we did the show and we did the book, we started a production company, and it was a real grind, and it was sort of successful, and we were able to get some investment. And I was not excited about the next 5 years of now really building the production company. I realized through the process that actually, you know what, this is not something that I want to do. I loved creating, but I realized that when you make television, the business side is not creative. And I was unhappy, and I hit another low.
This low felt familiar. It reminded Ben of the creeping anxiety and depression he felt back when he played rugby. But before it escalated, he was able to read the signs.
I have no time for anything fun anymore. I'm starting to lose sleep. I'm not feeling clear and sharp. I'm feeling cloudy. And so I started to pick those things up, and I realized there's something wrong. I need to make a change. And so I looked at what was going on, and I had to make a hard decision of making that change. And sometimes we're feeling depressed because we're doing something we don't love to be doing. And that creative expression that I was suppressing because I didn't have time for in the production company ultimately is like a pillar of wellness for me.
Ben knew running a production company wasn't for him. And now that it was jeopardizing his mental health, he needed to act. But he was torn.
Was he just going to start all over again?
I remember talking to my uncle. I said, Uncle Bill, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I navigate this? I don't know what I want to do next, and I don't want to start from the beginning. He said, wait, what are you talking about? This is not starting from the beginning. You are recycling your career. And we all should recycle our careers every once in a while. And what you're doing is you're taking everything that you've learned, all the skills that you've earned, and you're applying them to whatever is next. So you're just pivoting. You're not starting from the bottom. You are recycling. You're upcycling. And that made me think, wow, you know what? He's right. I'm not starting something from scratch. I'm just pivoting and I'm doing something a little bit different.
We all grow and change. So it makes sense that not only our careers, but our interests, our hobbies, our peers will grow and change as well. And when inevitable change comes, don't think of it as starting all over. Think of it as
recycling what you've learned and applying it to something new. And so once I created space for that and I started to lean into that, I started to feel back to myself.
sometimes it takes trying something new to feel the most like ourselves. Those moments, like starting a new job or meeting a stranger, expose who we are, our values and vulnerabilities, in ways that our day-to-day routines bury, as Ben would say. Ben ended up upcycling all that he learned from the buried life into a career in public speaking. His creative fire was lit again. We weren't kidding when we said this guy was all too familiar with starting over. And for that matter, you should be too. Because sometimes we have to quit what isn't working to make room for what will, even in a pandemic. And if that sounds impossible or risky, it doesn't have to be. Jason has some suggestions on how we can make room for novel experiences even nowadays.
You can create conditions for more serendipity to happen. John Hagel calls it the power of pull. You know, even something as simple as like your social media connections and the unexpected ways in which you can connect with them can create new linkages that you didn't anticipate. Not all novelty has to be as expensive, you know, like it's not always about getting on a plane and going to Europe, although that's really fun. It could just be like, go to like the wilderness, you know, outside your town, you know, take a different path to work, go to a exotic restaurant, you know, like just go try something completely different, you know, and when you're in the thing, go there with like an open mind, like go there like with an eagerness to absorb otherness.
With so many people struggling in this moment of unprecedented uncertainty, it feels quite unrealistic to tell people to put themselves first. But Ben kind of disagrees.
It seems selfish to go after our personal goals, but it's actually service for so many reasons. Because when you do what you love, you inspire other people to do what they love, right? That's the ripple effect. For everyone that's listening, that's younger, that's trying to decide if they should do their thing or not, as you grow older, you start to lose that youthful naivete. You need to harness that spirit. If you are feeling that discomfort or that unsettling unknowing of whether you should do this thing or not, just picture yourself laying on your deathbed, looking back onto this moment where you are right now, and ask your future self whether you will regret not doing it. And if the answer is you will regret it, then you have to do it.
Thank you, Ben. Amazing. Wow.
Thank you, gentlemen.
To most people, the idea of a bunch of guys going on a road trip to cross objectives off their bucket list sounded unfathomable. And maybe it is. But the spirit of the road trip eventually sold to MTV as a freaking TV show. And more importantly, those guys had the time of their lives. It's the same story with Yes Theory. We got lucky, we worked hard, and we stayed true to ourselves. But none of this would have happened if we didn't first have the courage to start. We get to make videos every week about pursuing novel experiences. We get to create new things like this podcast, all because we listened to Professor Peter Yunkin's advice to start chasing novel experiences. So here it is. It's your time now. Embrace the discomfort of the unknown and plunge into it with an open mind and heart. And when you're feeling stuck, put yourself in new situations where you can experience novelty and serendipity, as Jason suggests. And remember, humans have the gift to prescribe meaning to the mundane. So take a deep breath and look around you. Have you really noticed the color of the leaves outside of your window? What documentary have you been meaning to watch? Let's tap into the inspiration that lies all around us.
With that said, it's time for a challenge. This week, Ben gave us a little inspiration.
Imagine you have $10 million in your bank. Imagine that you have the ability to do anything. What would you do?
Your bucket list can cover a whole array of topics, from intellectual to spiritual, physical to social. Take out a piece of paper and just scribble down as many goals as you can think of. What you want to do, see, experience, try, become. Nothing is out of the question. This is your time to dream bigger than you ever have. Writing out a bucket list helps us get acquainted with the sides of ourselves we often overlook, our truest side with all our deepest hopes and dreams. So please, think of your bucket list as an opportunity to practice kindness and curiosity as you brainstorm what really matters, not what you think should matter.
Being more in touch with personal and professional milestones makes the day-to-day decisions easier, cumulatively amounting to fuller lives.
Okay, that's it for today. We want to see your bucket list, so share with us on Instagram by tagging @YesTheory and using the hashtag YesTheoryChallenge. I'm your host for this episode, Thomas Bragg, but I would not be here without my friends Matt Dajer and Ammar Kandil. This episode was produced by Joy Folks and Juliette Luini. It was edited by Joey Fishground. Dan Kroll sound designed and mixed it right up. The Yes Theory podcast is produced by Kate Ward for One Day Entertainment. The executive producers are Leah Sutherland, Morgan Seltzer, and Sam Rogaway from Headspace Studios.